It's very easy to get dragged into the left's political lexicon and language. It's very easy to end up also talking about things like equality. It's very easy to talk about freedom. It's much more important to moor that to foundational principles and say, what types of freedom are we talking about here? And where does the freedom come from? Who guarantees it? Both the political parties of the right, I think, have to articulate better. And once they've articulated them, their policies will flow from them.
Douglas, it's great to have you back on Spectator TV.
Great to be with you.
For your column this week, you've written about young women's voting patterns, and you've given some advice for the right-wing politicians and the conservatives. You've spoken a bit about Zack Polanski and Mamdani in your piece. Can you see their appeal for young women?
Well, it's not whether I can see their appeal for young women. Let's just start with the facts. The facts are that something like 4/5 of women in the first decade of voting age in New York who voted Mamdani, self-declared socialist. And that skews more than any other demographic in the New York voting blocks. And then there was this rather remarkable poll that just came out showing that 1 in 3 of their contemporaries in the UK, the first decade of women voters in the UK, apparently would like to vote for the Green Party under its magnificent new leader, Zack Polanski.
Yeah, and he has some quite colourful ideas about hypnotherapy, about the environment. He probably is the only politician still talking about the environment because it's not really the topic du jour at the moment, would you say?
Well, the Green Party kind of, through its name, has to speak about the environment, although they speak about it incredibly ineptly. They're always going to otherwise just be a sort of parasitic force which leaps onto whatever they see as being an opportunistic thing to gain some kind of increase in the polls. Of course, the Green Party, it's not about green, of course. It's about far left. As in many other countries, green just ends up being red. And Polanski is doing what the Green Party has done for years, which is sort of try to tack itself to the left of the Labour Party. What I mentioned in the piece is that the rhetoric that's coming from Polanski's mouth is the same rhetoric that's coming from Mamdani's. I quote the inaugural address that Mamdani gave once he became mayor of New York officially at the beginning of this month, where he said,
"We will replace the frigidity of rugged individualism with the warmth of collectivism."
That was a remarkable phrase for lots of reasons. One is that America is founded on rugged individualism, actually. And I suppose, secondly, that if he wanted to know anything about the warmth of collectivism, he could have spoken to the millions of people who were embraced by collectivism in the 20th century. But unfortunately, they're not here to tell us about it. Phrases like this, though, collectivism, anti-individualism, socialism, and then you get the rhetoric around that, the stuff of compassion, niceness, kindness, togetherness, persuasion, and all of these sorts of things. I say that this isn't just a political rhetoric. It is a political rhetoric that comes out of a set of political presuppositions. And as I mentioned in the piece, they are political presuppositions that, although I think they're fundamentally wrong, will have to be countered by people on the right. Mamdani has shown in New York that even if you have a lamentable track record, or in his case, almost no track record, he tried to be a rapper for a time after college, didn't work, worked for his mum for a time, ran for council, and now is running the biggest city in America. People thought, well, that would normally, in a normal season, that would be, it would be impossible for somebody to rise to the position of mayor of New York. But the point is, there were obviously things in his ideas. I don't see anything especially attractive in his personality. I don't see this vast charisma that some people talk about, his admirers. It's clearly his ideas that caught on. And it's going to have to be his ideas that are going to be challenged. And I think the right really does have a challenge here. And as I say in the piece, it's going to have to, in America and in the UK, in all countries, is going to have to reorient itself to some fundamental principles if it's going to, at the very least, counter, and then after countering, offer up a rival set of alternatives to the principles being offered by radical socialists like Mamdani and Polanski.
Do you agree with some of the writers? I know Andrew Neil's written about it before, the twilight of the centre-right. I know you've come on Spectator TV and said, you don't really understand what this obsession is with far-right politics. But lots of former conservative politicians might talk about, all these centrist dads don't have a political home anymore. And is it about this populist right that's sort of taken over, and people who seem to think of themselves as moderates just don't have a political home that they can call themselves conservative?
No, they obviously do have a political home. In America, the Republican Party remains a perfectly suitable political home for anyone on the right. In the UK, there are two homes for people on the right, Reform and the Conservative Party. It's not that they don't have a home. I think a lot of that rhetoric, first of all, just the far right thing is, my point, I think, to you in the past has been, it's just vastly overused. The cordon of where a lot of politicians of the centre and centre-left and centre-right let alone the far left, like to put politics is that everyone, their political boundaries, that is, they want to say that everyone who doesn't agree with them is far right, and that's obviously idiotic, and it dissolves the whole political lexicon. There's the problem of the definition of the far right. The centrist dad thing you mentioned is a kind of, I think that's a sort of an online thing. It's a way of insulting people if you're a Zoomer who thinks that you're wiser than your elders, and therefore you can insult them and dismiss them. There are, of course, such sort of people, those sort of centrist dads. But all of these things feed into it. My point is simply that if you look at the electoral success of Mamdani, if you look at the real possibility that the response to Trumpism in the US could be a much more radical form of leftism than anything we've seen before from the Democrats. And if you look, as I say, in the UK, at the way in which the polls are breaking down, there's as you'll have noticed, there's no great love for Keir Starmer's Labour Party in the country. There are these offers on the right. That does mean the right-wing vote is split. And it does mean we are seeing these rather strange polls showing the radical leftists of the Green Party surging. After, of course, the sort of magnificent Harry-Kiri of the Your Party movement of still indeterminate leadership. The fundamental point is I just do think this is a good opportunity for the right to say what it is that they stand for. And it's important not just to counter the claims that, for instance, our answers are in collectivism or socialism. It's going to be the job of right-wing parties, conservative parties, to state what their foundations are. And if they do that, I think they have a much better chance of seeing off this threat from the left. If they simply laugh at the left or so on, they may well continue to see things like we saw in New York.
And you offer three principles that the Conservatives or right-wing politicians could base their foundations on. And I thought your one about fairness was very interesting.
Well, let's start with the first, which is order. As I mentioned in the piece, we all know that left-wing parties, and indeed some right-wingers, particularly libertarian right-wingers in the state, are very good about talking about freedom. Collective freedom, individual freedom, and so on. But any grown-up knows that freedom is not an unalloyed good. It has to be riding side saddle with order. If we had the freedom to simply do anything we wanted in the streets and there was no law or order, then there'd be pandemonium. Order is an incredibly important thing for the right of politics to stress. Not least because when the left gets into ideas like, it's better if we have fewer police, or we'd all be safer if the prisons were emptied. An experiment which would not last 24 hours. But in order to counter those things, the right has to explain once again why order is important in a society, why the police is important in a society, why laws are important in a society. So that's the first one I mentioned, order. The second one, as you mentioned, is fairness. As I see it, the left has had a very good run in recent years of talking about equality and indeed equity. We've sort of seen off the worst of the equity movement. The equity movement is everybody in society should end up with the same outcomes. We should all be equally rich, equally beautiful, equally tall, equally thin or fat, have equal salaries, and much more. Of course, equity is a delusion, it's undesirable, and of course, it's also impossible. But equality is a harder one for people to counter. Equality, as the left is currently using it, is not as a term, is not far off from equity. But I say the problem with countering the equality argument on the right is that everyone knows there is something in it. On some levels, we do want equality. And there are all sorts of forms of equality. Equality before the law, for instance, which goes back to the order point, is incredibly important in a society. But the term you use for it and the way of thinking about it is not about equality, it's about fairness. Fairness, it seems to me, is a much better policy for the right to run on. First of all, a child knows what is fair and what is unfair. And an adult can also notice it. We know, for instance, that counter the equality advocates, if somebody has put a lot of work into something and has earned money for it, and somebody else has done no work, the two should not be given equal amounts of money. Now, it would be equal if they were, but it would be unfair because one person has put in labor and the other has not. So a much better way to look at this, I think, is simply fairness in society. And that goes to a whole range of issues, economic, social. It goes to the policing issues, the legal issues in the UK. Why has the two-tier Keir thing caught on so well? Because people have noticed there is something fundamentally, what? It's not about inequality or equality, it's unfairness. It's that some people are judged fairly and some unfairly, and others deeply unfairly, from the police, by the courts, and much more. So this is an incredibly important thing to address. But there is a third, as you know, which I mentioned in the piece, which is accountability. That is something which the left, it seems to me, and by the way, I include in that much of the conservative administrations of the last decade and a half, the left has done a lot to destroy the idea of accountability. And that is that if you promise to do something and you don't do it, you are held accountable for it. Again, a child could understand that, an adult can understand it. We all in our working lives are held accountable for what we do. So why should police not be held accountable, for instance? Why should police chiefs not be held accountable? Why should there be no cost to them when they muck up? Why should government get into office promising not to do something, then do it, and there's no accountability for it? Why should people consistently fail at their jobs in the civil service, or in the border forces, or in government, or much more? No accountability. Nothing happens. The return of accountability to politics and our political life, it seems to me, would be a really, really useful thing to push for.
And this thing for politicians just to focus on principles rather than policies is slightly something Kemi is trying to focus on, because she's not saying the Conservative government will do this if they get into power. She's actually saying we're going to take a breather, reflect on 15 years of what many people call failure. But there is this obsession from the public that requires politicians to give policy frameworks. It makes it quite difficult for them.
Well, there's no point in having policies if you don't have principles.
Yeah.
That's just floating in thin air. Policies can only come from principles. Otherwise, all you've got is a few knee-jerk reactions to that day's news, and you end up on the back foot forever announcing things you don't really understand. And that has happened with a lot of political parties in the tumult of recent years.
Do you think reform has principles?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think the Conservatives have principles. I think the Labour Party has principles. My point is that the right-wing parties have to be clearer on what the foundations of those principles are. It's very easy. This is one of the points I try to bring across in the article is it's very easy to get dragged into the left's political lexicon and language. It's very easy to end up also talking about things like equality and not really have a full understanding of how these things should be moored to stronger foundations. It's very easy to talk about freedom. It's much more important to moor that to foundational principles and say, what types of freedom are we talking about here? And where does the freedom come from? Who guarantees it? What is the source of the freedom? Those are things that both the political parties of the right, I think, have to articulate better. And once they've articulated them, their policies will flow from them. And the public will know where they're coming from. One of the things you often hear from voters is, I mean, more in the UK these days than in the US, but is, I don't know what they stand for. And I think that's one of the things that the Conservative Party is trying to address at the moment. I do think that what Kemi is doing is sensible, is not to just be like pushed into announcing policy after policy after policy, but saying, yes, we had 14 years in government as a majority party and then with and of course in a coalition government, but we had 14 years in power. Some things went okay, a lot of things didn't. We need to think about what it is that we stand for, what went wrong in those years, and what the principles are that we're going to put in front of the public at the next election that would make them want to vote for us. I saw something came up on my Instagram feed recently, which, as you know, we're all now getting our ideas from. But it was a rather touching interview from the 80s. I suppose the algorithm has seen the sort of thing that I'm hot for, of Margaret Thatcher being interviewed by, I think, Brian Walden. And also, the interviewer was saying to her, but politics is about consensus, isn't it, Mrs. Thatcher? And she says, no, it is not about consensus. It is about putting a set of ideas, principles, beliefs, policies in front of the public, and if they like them, they will vote for them, and if they don't, they won't, and if they vote for them, then you have the mandate to enact those policies. That's, in a nutshell, what I would like to see.
It's simple, really.
Yeah.
I spoke to a Conservative recently, and I asked, when everyone says to you, how could you possibly vote Conservative now? What is your answer and how do you feel about that? And their response to me was, well, I am Conservative, so what choice do I have? Which brings me on to think, a lot of people are saying the Tories are finished, the Conservative Party is over, the Tories are toast. It's been the most successful party in the history of democracy. So do you share that view that it's over for the Conservative Party? Because
that's a very weak response by the Conservative you spoke to. It sounds like a prisoner.
I think it was someone who's licking their wounds.
Right. Well, that's not really good enough. They should stop licking their wounds by now. I mean, after an electoral defeat, I think you should have a day or two of reflection, then get out back into the fight. So I don't particularly admire that sentiment. Any political party has to be able to define what it stands for. I say that in the full knowledge of the fact that the Labour Party went into the last election saying very little about what it stood for, or at least hoping that we wouldn't sort of notice. Of course, the Conservative Party is not dead. It's still the main party of opposition in the Commons. It took a hell of a battering at the last election. And it has to consider, a number of things at once, as we all do. The first is that there's no law of nature that means that the Conservative Party will exist for the rest of time. As you say, it's the most successful, oldest political party. But just because something is old does not mean it will live forever. And it shouldn't expect that by some kind of divine right. But on the other hand, of course, it has to work out, yes, what has gone wrong and what would make them stand out when they next stand before the electorate. What would make it desirable for people to vote for them again? We do see, of course, I mean, we're only, 18 months since the last general election in the UK. At times like this, particularly in five-year parliaments, one of the great gifts that Nick Clegg gave the country in his estimable time in office since we now have 5-year fixed-term parliaments, there's 3.5 years to go now till the next election. And in these periods, it's inevitable that a lot of polls will show rebellion by the voters. Is Reform's current high ranking in the polls a demonstration of that rebellion? Would, if we actually, came to the ballot box again sooner than that, would that manifest in a landslide win for Reform? Very hard to see. And equally, as I mentioned in the piece, would this surge in the polls of the radical left Green Party actually manifest in parliamentary seats? Again, we'd have to see. Maybe it's a protest at the moment. Maybe these deranged young women I mentioned in the piece actually would follow through on it and persuade their significant others to vote in the same way. And maybe the Green Party would actually become a serious force in Parliament. All of these things are possible. But no, I don't think it's fated. Nothing is written or anything like that. It's all in the hands of the individuals who are in charge of these parties.
Douglas Murray, thank you very much for joining us.
It's a great pleasure as always. I'm sorry we didn't get on to the hypnotism.